Hi, thank you for watching this video, in which I will present a research designed to capture lecturers' curational behavior. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Leighton, and I work at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, where I'm a PhD researcher at the research group Higher Education, Research and Innovation. I'm also a lecturer in media and publishing, and I thoroughly enjoy designing courses and finding the best text, images, videos, and other materials for students to use in those courses. In my research, this is what I look at: how lecturers in universities of applied sciences work with those texts, images, videos, in other words, with educational resources. As the Dutch Ministry of Education pointed out in 2015, it's important that lecturers know how to utilize and reuse the huge amount of resources that are available to them. Because, in the words of SurfNet, a Dutch organization that supports digitization in education, combining multiple types of resources is critical in providing students with an optimized learning experience, with high quality of education, and in making connections with the industry. But dealing with materials is not straightforward per se. It can be a challenge to select materials in such a way that they match course topics and students' prior knowledge, and to structure those resources well in order to support students' learning. Offering well-selected and structured resources is particularly important in the current situation. Now that we are using online environments in our teaching even more than we used to, the materials we provide our students with should be adequate and effective, even without much interaction with a lecturer. Although we know it's important to select, structure, and present resources well, we don't know an awful lot about how lecturers actually approach this task. A literature review I recently carried out shows that previous research has mainly looked at criteria that lecturers use when selecting resources, and at obstacles they experience in their use of resources. However, the use of resources consists of more than mere selection, and behavior is influenced by other elements than obstacles people experience or perceive. When I say there's more to the use of resources than selection, I mainly refer to structuring and presenting of the resources that is also part of the package. This combination of selecting, structuring, and presenting existing resources in media often is referred to as curation. We know the word curation from the context of the museum, where a curator selects artifacts, structures them into an exhibition, and puts up the signs that explain and contextualize what the museum visitor sees. Over the last decade or so, the use of the word has expanded from museums and the art scene to other fields, such as retail and media, where the term is used to describe a number of activities that revolve around dealing with large amounts of content. Curation is not just about selecting objects or content. It's about making a coherent whole out of existing items. As Bhaskar says, curation is the ensemble of activities that goes beyond selecting and arranging to blend with refining and displaying, explaining and simplifying, categorizing and organizing. And this actually is remarkably similar to what lecturers in higher education do with educational resources. The first to introduce the notion of lecturers as curators was George Siemens, and others since have agreed that the task of providing resources is indeed very similar to the task of curators in museums. So in my study, this is the approach I've taken: lecturers as curators of educational resources. I define curation in my study as selecting and structuring resources for educational purposes, as well as presenting them and adding context and coherence. In the study, I don't just want to identify what lecturers do, their behavior, but also gain insights in the beliefs and attitudes that lead to this behavior. For this, I will use the lens of Eschen's theory of planned behavior. As you can see in the picture, this theory states that intention is the most important factor influencing behavior, and intention in turn is shaped by three conceptually independent determinants: attitude towards behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. Say that the behavior you're looking at is running. Whether or not someone is likely to go running twice a week depends on their intention to do so, which is formed by their attitude towards the behavior. How do they feel about running? Are they positive or negative about it? And this attitude comes from beliefs they have about running. Is it desirable to be someone who runs? What do they gain from running? A second element that influences intentions is the subjective norm. What does someone think about the behavior in relation to the judgment of others? So basically, what will my friends say about me running twice a week? Or what will my doctor say? Thirdly, there's the degree of perceived behavioral control, which is related to self-efficacy. How easy or difficult do you think performing the behavior is? Do you think you can run? Might there be something that influences your ability to run, like maybe the fact that there's no park nearby, or you don't have the right shoes, or your knees are in terrible shape? These three determinants influence the intention to actually perform behavior, and intention in turn influences the actual behavior. So, with this lens of the theory of planned behavior, I want to study lecturers' curational behavior. First, I want to know more about the behavior itself. What is it that lecturers actually do? How do they curate educational resources? And then I also want to learn more about what it is that shapes that behavior. When looking at lecturers' curational behavior, I want to learn about how they approach the design of a course, in what stage and in which ways do they consider resources they will use. I also want to look into the various parts of curational behavior. How do they select resources? How do they structure them? And what are their considerations in presenting resources in such a way that they have context and coherence? In order to uncover how then this curational behavior is shaped, I aim to look at intentions, the attitudes lecturers have towards curation of educational resources, at other peoples or parties that play a role in their curational behavior, and at elements that make it hard or easy for lecturers to perform the behavior. For this, I aim to conduct semi-structured interviews with 25 lecturers at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. These lecturers will be module coordinators or have a similar role, meaning that they are either on their own or as part of a team, responsible for designing resources and selecting and structuring the resources in those courses. The lecturers interviewed will be working in different bachelor programs throughout the university, covering different disciplines and ensuring that the sample represents multiple perspectives. To start the conversation, I will ask a lecturer to introduce me to a course they've previously designed and via means of stimulated recall, talk me through the design process. Participants will be recruited via an open call in the research group newsletter and by snowballing and networking. Criteria for selection will ensure that the sample represents a mix of lecturers from different disciplines with both shorter and longer experience in designing courses and who work on a variation of module types from knowledge transfer to lab work or project work. The interviews will be carried out in Microsoft Teams. Access to the university campus will unfortunately still be very limited in the upcoming semester, so we would not want to use lecturers' valuable and scarce on-campus time for this. And using video interviews is an excellent means to allow for flexibility in planning. Also, it's best to use a medium that participants know, as that might be less intimidating. Since the university has implemented MS Teams university-wide this spring, all participants will have access to it and have at least some experience with it. A benefit of using MS Teams is that the interviews can be easily recorded. Of course, this is something that needs to be permitted by the participants before the interview by means of a consent form. A challenge reported when it comes to the use of video interviews is that it might be harder to reach the same level of rapport as in face-to-face interviews. A solution for this is to establish a connection with the participants beforehand by exchanging a series of emails leading up to the interview, and that's what I intend to do. So I've talked about who I will interview and how, which brings us to the actual questions I'll be asking the participants. For this, I'm constructing an interview guide as to strengthen the reliability of the interviews. The approach I use in constructing the interview guide is the interview protocol refinement framework, which consists of 4 phases. Ensuring that the interview questions align with the research questions. Then in the second phase, constructing an inquiry-based conversation, followed by soliciting feedback on the protocol, and in the fourth and final phase, piloting the interview protocol. In this presentation, I would like to zoom in on the first phase, in which I've developed the research questions discussed earlier and then developed the interview questions and aligned those two in a matrix. The research questions I've already shared with you, so I'll jump straight to the development of the interview questions. I've based those on a number of sources around curriculum design, the theory of planned behavior, and teacher beliefs. I will start the interview by setting the scene and starting the stimulated recall with the course the lecturer has previously designed. Questions in this phase are aimed at getting a clearer picture of this course, talking about, among other things, course aims and assessment. Once I have an overview of what the course looks like, I will ask about the design process, starting with the very open question to sketch the design process. In this phase, all elements of the course design can come up. I'm interested to learn how this process goes and if lecturers mention resources themselves, and if so, where in the design process. Should lecturers have difficulty talking about the design process, stimulating questions that ask after elements of curriculum design can be: what was the starting point of your design process? How did you decide on aims, or how did you decide on learning activities? In case educational resources have been mentioned by the lecturer, then would be the time to zoom in on those. Should they not have mentioned the use of resources yet, this is where I introduce my interest in them. If needed, here I'll explain what resources are within the context of this study. I'm interested in media that hold content, not in tools such as software or learning platforms. Examples of questions to be asked here are: how did you decide which resources you would use? And then there are also questions around selecting, structuring, and presenting those resources. I do not only want to learn about what lecturers do when it comes to curating resources or their behavior, I also want to know what shapes this behavior. This means taking one step back from the course design and introducing them to the notion of curation, asking them to what extent they consider curation part of their role as lecturers, and what they think advantages and disadvantages of curation are, and what makes it hard or easy to curate resources. Because there are also other variables that can influence behavior, Ashton says you should consider anything that can be an important influence on the behavior. In this case, how lecturers view education in general, their teaching beliefs. So I'll also ask some questions that will help establish if lecturers are more teacher-focused or student-focused, and more information-focused or more experience-focused, following the categories described by Luft and Roerich. Examples of questions that can establish this are: how do you describe your role as a teacher, and how do you maximize student learning? With these questions, I will wrap up the interview. In line with the interview guide refinement protocol, I aligned all interview questions with the research questions in a matrix that shows that with these interview questions, all research questions are covered. To complete the research design, the next steps are to take the questions and build an inquiry-based conversation around them, constructing a complete interview protocol. This protocol will then be submitted to 2 other researchers for feedback, and an improved version will be piloted in 2 test interviews. Simultaneously, an approach for analysis needs to be developed. And with that, I'd like to wrap up this presentation. Of course, I would be very interested to learn what your thoughts on this research design are, and I would love to read your feedback and questions in the comments. Thank you very much for your attention.